All right, welcome everyone to another Monticello for Kids live stream. We're so glad that you could join us. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from or any questions you have for us throughout the live stream. My name is Laura. I work at Monticello, and we'll show you a picture of that very famous house. And I work there in our education department. And we are still staying at home and staying safe. And we look forward to getting to welcome you back to the mountaintop someday. But we are continuing to learn about the many things that have happened at Monticello throughout its history and how it connects to our lives today. And so as today, we're going to look at a phase of Jefferson's life, Thomas Jefferson, our third president and author of the Declaration of Independence. We're going to look at what he was doing during the American Revolution or the Revolutionary War. So this was earlier in his career, after writing the Declaration of Independence, before he went on to be our ambassador to France, become our third president. And he was actually governor for 2 one-year terms during the American Revolution. And if you've watched our earlier live streams this week on Wednesday with author Michael Kranish, or yesterday as our colleague Bill Barker portrayed or acted as Thomas Jefferson, you know we're talking about the British invasion of Monticello. Did you guys know that British troops actually came to Monticello during the American Revolution, hoping to capture Governor Thomas Jefferson? But he snuck away, and over the years, this story has become bigger than life. So we'll talk about how looking at this story from different perspectives and the different records we have of this story helps us understand. And then we'll think a little bit about what it means to be revolutionary and what pops to mind when you think of the Revolutionary War more than a tricorn hat. So we will make our own out of some construction paper too. Now, this story is all about just acting quickly and riding through the night. We're going to see a few different characters traveling through this story. So think with me, what would you use to navigate or find your way on a trip? What are some tools that you would use to find your way? Let us know in the comments. Now, during the American Revolution, colonists here in the new United States, or former colonists, new Americans, were fighting for independence from the British. They wanted their rights to be recognized, and so they were in the middle of a war. And things in Virginia had been very difficult. Jefferson was struggling with having enough troops and where to send resources. A compass is an excellent thing to use. And the British had already made their way through Richmond, where the capital had been moved by Governor Jefferson. And Jefferson and the legislature had already had to leave Richmond, and they temporarily moved to Charlottesville just for safety. And so that is where Jefferson was in June of 1781. A map and a compass, both excellent things to use for navigating. And in this case, the first character in our story doing some navigating was a man named Jack Jouett. And he was an excellent horseman, and he was down in Louisa County, not far from Monticello, about 40 miles. So not far today, but pretty far by horseback. And he was at the Cuckoo Tavern, which was owned by his family, and he overheard a troop of British officers talking of their plans to make their way to Charlottesville and arrest Governor Jefferson and the legislature. So he quickly got on horseback and made his way down the 3-notched road. So this was another way that he was navigating, was using signs. These signs were as simple as notches cut in trees along the road to help him find his way. So we're going to look at some maps of the time to help us think about where they were. So here is a map of Revolutionary Virginia. This map was drawn in part by Jefferson's father, Peter Jefferson, along with Joshua Fry. And that little red dot tells us where all of this action was happening. So we're going to zoom in and we'll see this little gap in the mountains where Monticello sits, where Jack Jouett was quickly making his way through the night to Governor Jefferson. And here is a recreation of the paths everyone was taking. So the British troops were following Bannister Tarleton, their commander, and this was a troop on horseback, and they were a form of cavalry known as dragoons. Isn't that fun to say? And they actually wore green coats instead of red coats. We'll see some pictures later. And Jack Jouett knew the area really well, so he snuck off on his horse on his own and took a quick path to get to Monticello before the British did. So he arrived at Monticello, but not the Monticello that we think of now or that we saw in that earlier picture. This is a very funny suggestion for how to navigate, right? Activate your GPS. Of course, this was not an option for Jack Jouett or Thomas Jefferson. So Jouett had to really know where he was going in order to arrive at this version of Monticello. And it was Monticello 1, as we call it, Jefferson's earlier design for the home. So this is one of his drawings of what he wanted the house to look like. And Jack Jouett, here is a recreation of what that moment might have looked like up at Monticello a few years ago, rode up and warned Jefferson early in the morning that the British were coming, just like Paul Revere did up in Massachusetts before the battles of Lexington and Concord a few years before. And Jefferson was able to alert all of the other Virginia politicians staying there, and they were able to safely escape. Jefferson sent his family off to first a friend's plantation and then later on to his other plantation in Bedford near Lynchburg called Poplar Forest. And Jefferson waited dramatically until the last minute, gathering up papers and important things from around the house before he, knowing the land just as well as Jack Jouett did, rode off on horseback at the very last minute. Now, this is a very exciting and dramatic story. And another way to navigate that fits into this story is a part of the tale that has been formed is Jefferson looking down from Carter Mountain using his pocket spyglass, or a little sort of telescope, to see the British approaching as he fled. And so Jefferson left safely and was not captured by the British. And there's really no telling what would have happened if Jefferson had been captured. He probably would have been taken to London, and he had committed treason in working against the British crown. But Jefferson's story isn't the only one to think about in this story. So let's think about what helps you learn about a story in a new way. What helps you think about something differently? And for me, one of my favorite things to do is think about someone else's perspective or the way they saw the situation. This is something valuable that historians do all of the time, to think about different people who were there and witnessed this moment. So after Jefferson left, a portion of Bannister Tarleton's troops arrived at Monticello, led by Captain McLeod, who came face to face with Jefferson's enslaved butler, Martin Hemmings. Here we have a picture of a professional reenactor, or an actor who helps us understand historical figures, pretending to be Martin Hemmings at Monticello. And he came face to face with Captain McLeod, who demanded to know where Jefferson was. And the stories tell us that Martin Hemmings did not tell Captain McLeod where Jefferson had gone. Why would he have chosen not to tell the British troops where Jefferson had gone? Why would he be seemingly loyal in that way to the man who owned him? Maybe he was trying to protect his own family members who were still there at Monticello. It was only Jefferson and his family who had gotten to flee from these troops. We know that some members of the enslaved community left with the British troops from Monticello, perhaps hoping that the British troops would free them. Perhaps they were taken by force. We don't know all of the details of the story. It changes in the different records. Another great way to learn about history, hearing a lecture. That's definitely a modern way to hear about different stories in history. We can also think about what this story was like for Jefferson's family members. So Jefferson and his wife were living at Monticello, and they had several young daughters. So here are more of those reenactors. So you can imagine how scary this would have been, and how urgently Jefferson got his family to safety. But again, this wasn't guaranteeing safety for everyone at Monticello, right? So they got to leave quickly and move on to another family property where they knew they would be safe. And then, of course, we can think about the perspective of the British officers, right? I told you that these dragoons under Bannister Tarleton had some excellent uniforms. Here is a painting of Bannister Tarleton. So those green coats and bear fur hats as they rode on horseback. So you can imagine what this would have been like. So here's a modern imagining of what it would have been like when these British troops arrived at Monticello. That's a pretty intimidating outfit, although it looks pretty funny from a modern perspective, right? And they were following orders and trying to fulfill their duty to capture Jefferson. But they were awfully far from England as they tried to fulfill these duties. And just a little more than a year later, the American Revolution is won and the British surrender, also here in Virginia at Yorktown. So their efforts do not maintain British control over the new Commonwealth of Virginia. So that's part of this legacy too. And then we can think about what this event meant for Jefferson. He was governor when he was captured, but technically his time as governor was over, but no one had been named as a replacement yet. So some people later accused him of being a coward for running away from the British, rather than seeing that he was trying to keep the legislature safe. And Jefferson felt very strongly that he had acted the best that he could, and was very resentful of all of these rumors that were spread about him later on. And this is part of that political legacy that Jefferson had as a politician, right? He was trying to keep up his reputation so that he could function in politics well. So that's really tricky to imagine too, what this meant for Jefferson as he navigated the new government that they were building in Virginia. It was very early on in their history, in our history, in trying to function as a new government. And all of this makes us think, what does it mean to be revolutionary? So I'm gonna finish off another tricorn hat as we talk about this, right? When we think about Jefferson in the Revolution, we think about them fighting against the British Army for freedom. And so what were they looking for freedom from? They wanted to make sure that they had a voice in their government and that their voices could be heard. And this is something that's part of the American legacy today, is that we want to make sure that our nation becomes a place and continues to work towards Jefferson's ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, where everyone's voice is valued and heard. Now, I'll try and unjam my stapler here so we can put this hat together. We'll start by putting the rosette, or cockade as it's called, onto one of the sides. So 3 little flower shapes stacked on top of each other with a hole in the middle. And I'm going to use a small metal brad to pin them all together to the side of my hat. But you can also just glue them together. That would be fine too. So thinking about voices for everyone, and thinking about how laws and protections affect our neighbors, right? They were thinking about what freedom meant for those who were far away from the British Crown and Parliament. And so this is another way to be revolutionaries, to think about how can things be better for those around us, and make positive change in our communities. So it doesn't have to mean dramatically riding through the night, but it can mean really significant changes in our communities. And this means dreaming big, right? Jefferson words have been an inspiration through the years to imagine a world where everyone's voices matters, exactly like you are always saying. It means fighting for freedom or for a voice. These protections of liberty from power that is not being used well. So after stapling together 3 black pieces of paper like this, or you could use any color you'd like and create your own revolutionary hat, stapled together with a fun new rosette on it, you have yourself a tricorn hat. Let's be a little adventurous, a little revolutionary, and I'll model it for you. It's a little small, but that's okay. That's part of the fun. So I hope you all continue to think about what it means to be revolutionary. If you guys have questions for us, please let us know in the comments. The instructions and a template for cutting out all of the pieces for this tricorn hat are up for you on our website. You can read more about the story of Jack Jouett and how he helped achieve American freedom by keeping the new government that was set up to have a voice for all Virginians and all Americans safe. And you can read more about how we know these stories of Monticello history through the Getting Word Project. Some of our best records of this story come down through the descendants of the enslaved community. So the words of Peter Fawcett, Isaac Granger, Jefferson, they're the ones who tell us about how this story was passed down from generation to generation at Monticello. And it was a big part of the legacy of those families who had been there in that moment after Jefferson left. There is also a lesson plan up on our website where you can dig into Jefferson's words about what it means to be revolutionary. He had some pretty big ideas about what change could mean for the nation. And as we've talked about before, Jefferson said more than once, the earth belongs to the living. And that meant that even though Jefferson was so important in our history in establishing these words of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, he wanted us, the next generations, to move forward and see how we could dream even bigger and make the nation an even better place for those around us. So look more into these stories, continue to think about history from many different perspectives and voices you might not have considered before. And we hope you join us next week as some of our archaeologists join us to talk about what they've learned about the lives of some of the enslaved families who lived at Monticello. So thank you all for joining us and have a great weekend.